Imagine never having to scrub through hours of audio or video ever again in order to find a killer quote for your story. Time pressure is huge in journalism. You need to make sure that you're filing your copy to tight deadlines. However, accuracy is non-negotiable for legal reasons. So what if there was a tool that could pinpoint key statements and make sure that you get them into your story? This AI tool promises the opportunity to do that. So I'm going to take you through and we're going to see how well this can work at finding those key statements for your story. Okay, so the tool that we're going to use to have a go at this today is the Google AI Studio, and you can access the Google AI Studio by going to aistudio.google.com. It has lots of different elements to it. One of the things that we've already looked at is the Google Stream, which can be really helpful when using programs such as Photoshop and Premiere, with being able to help you with different aspects of those. What we're going to be in today is the chat function, and it allows you basically to function as a large language model effectively, and that's what we're going to be using it for at this point. So some of the settings on here can be quite helpful. So one of the things that's on the right hand side here is the temperature, and that identifies the creativity allowed in the responses. And obviously one of the things that we're looking at here is quotes and getting accurate quotes. So we don't actually want any creativity whatsoever for that. So instead of that being set at 1, we're going to take that all the way down to 0, because creativity is not the purpose of what we're looking at here. So in order to test this out, I'm going to go into a podcast. So this one is a podcast that Joe Rogan did with Donald Trump in the run-up to the presidential election of last year. And one of the ways that this can be quite helpful in terms of being able to identify key quotes is if you go into the transcript of the podcast and show the transcript, and that will appear on the right hand side of here, and it's got a timestamp that's sat alongside that. So this podcast went on for 3 hours, so that is obviously a huge amount of time and would take a huge amount of time to go through in order to kind of identify key quotes. But one of the things that we can do here is that we can copy the quote, the transcript of the entire show here, and that will basically allow us then to pinpoint some key things from it that we can then look at and identify if we can find some key quotes within it. Now obviously if you were doing a piece that was right after this event, I would imagine that somebody will probably be watching this podcast as soon as it comes out. So it may be that one person would watch the entire thing and make sure that you pick out the key quotes and that you haven't missed anything. But this might be a tool for somebody being able to identify a little bit sooner some of the kind of key snippets that have come out of the podcast. Because obviously if it's going to take you 3 hours to watch it, it may be that somebody else is able to get there a little bit faster in terms of identifying a few key things that were said by going through the entire transcript of the podcast, which is just finished here now. So once I've highlighted it all, I copy it, and then I bring it into the Google AI Studio. So before I paste it in, one of the things I obviously need to do that's quite crucial is give it a prompt that it can then use as an identifying exactly what I want it to do. So I'm just going to put a prompt in now, and then I'm going to paste the quotes in, and then we're going to see what it comes back with. Okay, so this is the prompt that I put into it here. So it says, this is a transcript of a podcast between Donald Trump and Joe Rogan. I want you to act as an experienced political reporter and identify key quotes from Donald Trump in this podcast that are likely to be of interest to an American domestic news audience. Now obviously that is because I put this particular podcast in. However, obviously you would need to vary what you're putting in with the prompt depending on the transcript that you put into it. So if you've got a transcript with a football manager after a game, you would need to kind of say an experienced sports reporter and identify key quotes from the name of the manager about the result and introduce a bit of context so it kind of understands what you're looking for. So what I'm wanting to do out of this is I'm wanting it to pinpoint the quotes using the time code and a short summary after the quote to tell me why it thinks I should look at that quote. So the time code's quite important because obviously that means I'm able to search through the video and find the quote and validate it. The short summary could be quite useful as well because it might pick up on something that I'm not necessarily thinking about in terms of this interview, and that it might basically provide a bit of a guidance in terms of what I might want to look out for in this. So that might be quite useful. We'll see how that works out. And as it says here, you can include the time code to allow me to see the quote quickly. And then I put the time script. And then I put the transcript of the podcast in. Now, one of the things that's quite interesting with this is I've actually exceeded the amount of tokens I can use because this is a 3-hour podcast. So one of the things that I'm going to have to do before I press run on this particular prompt is that I'm going to need to cut this into half. So I'm going to go down my transcript now, and after 1.5 hours I'm going to cut it and then I'm going to run the prompt twice to make sure that I'm doing the second half of it. So I'm going to stop here at 1:31:14, so I'm going to need to bring that transcript in afterwards, and then if I get rid of all this here, then I should hopefully be in a position where I can run my prompt. So I'm just going to delete the second half of this. Okay, so I've now managed to chop that second half out. So as you can see now, my token usage is about 28,000, and that's below the 32,000 limit. So I'm now going to run my prompt and see what happens when I do that. Okay, so it's run that prompt now, and it's come up with 20 quotes from the episode, and it's given me some different topics that he's been talking about in this episode that I can have a look through. So the first one's about a shift in media perception. I'm not too interested in that one. The surreal experience of the presidency. That's a very short quote, so again, that's not particularly helpful. So this one here on governing survival is potentially quite interesting. So this is him talking about his first term. I was doing a lot of that. I had two things I was really focused on: governing the country and survival. From the moment I got into office, all of a sudden it meant they came down. Nobody's ever been treated this way, and it's him not being very happy about the way he was treated as president. The dangers of picking non-politicians. His biggest mistakes in office, so that might be quite interesting. So the biggest mistake I made was to pick some people that shouldn't have been picked. I picked a few people that were neocons or bad people or disloyal people. So again, that's him talking about his mistakes in office previously, so that might be something that would be of interest in terms of the story. I think if we go down here, the Wuhan lab and COVID-19. So again, this is something that's likely to be of interest as a story. So the following day they said something's happening in China, so could we meet? And they said, what's happening? People are dying. So you got obviously some of the language in this. You need to have a look around. So it's talking about the outbreak of COVID-19 in China. And him reiterating his belief, as it says there in the summary, that COVID-19 originated from the Wuhan lab. So again, these are things that are coming out of the podcast that can be then made into stories. So what we can do with that one in particular, if we go to the time code of 5821, go into the video, and then we want to try and get to that point. We're just coming up on this bit here about COVID, so we'll just let that play.
You have And I'll never forget it. The following day, they said, "Something's happening in China, sir. Could we meet?" I said, "What's happening?" "People are dying." And it was all around the Wuhan lab, by the way. There are pictures with little lines, their body bags.
So as you can see,
all around the Wuhan lab. And I always said that from the beginning, Joe. Was, they tried to say, first they said it was France, and they blamed everybody.
Right.
But then they say it was bats from a cave 2,000 miles.
So you can see when you go back into the AI studio that quote is accurate. So that gives you a little bit of confidence in that, these quotes that it's pulling out are accurate, and that you can go and you can search them. Obviously, as a journalist, you can't rely on the Google AI Studio to give you, direct quotes. You need to go and check. But as you can see, that quote was 50 minutes into this podcast. That would take you a long time to get to. And obviously, a quote with Donald Trump talking about COVID-19 is going to be a contentious thing. So that is a very good way of getting to that direct quote to get into that story. So another way that, sticking with the COVID theme, like for example, the public inquiry that we had in this country following COVID-19, a lot of that evidence was quite lengthy with various politicians and people that were working in the government at the time. And one way of being able to dig out key quotes from that as well would be to look at some of this evidence and to be able to kind of pick out key quotes, checking those key quotes that they're accurate, and making sure that you're getting exact quotes of what people are saying. Because now with this quote from Donald Trump, for example, talking about COVID and the Wuhan lab, you can then go away and start thinking about putting together a story about how this is kind of going to impact at this point the election that was happening in America, and his belief that this was something that escaped from a laboratory in China rather than anything else. So that is one way in which you can really kind of use this as a way of going through quite lengthy stuff to identify key quotes and then build stories from that. Another way that you can potentially use this is that I've gone into Hansard, which is the Parliament's record of what's been said during Parliament when it sits. And I've got a copy of Prime Minister's questions from Wednesday the 3rd of September. I've downloaded the text, which is something that I've done here. And what I'm going to do then is put that into Google AI Studio. Okay, so this time I've got a quote that I'm putting in to have a look at this. So I've got in here that this is a transcript of Prime Minister's question time in the UK Parliament. Again, I want them to act as an experienced political reporter and identify key quotes from Keir Starmer in this case, or any other politician, and things that are likely again to be of interest to a UK domestic news audience. And I'm wanting to pinpoint the quotes along with a short summary after the quote to identify why it would be important. So I'm going to upload the transcript into here, and I'm going to run it and then see what it manages to identify from Prime Minister's question time that would be of interest when that's happened. Again, I'm going to reduce this temperature to 0 to make sure that we're prioritising accuracy over creativity, and we'll see what happens when I put that through. Okay, so it's just putting this through now. So one of the things that I've noticed this time round is it's identified quite a lot of quotes in here. So what I'm going to ask it to do now is prioritise the most important 10, because it's quite a lot of information to have a look at here. So I'm going to see what happens when I do that. So I'm going to ask it to prioritise the most important 10 quotes from the session with the most important ones first and see what happens when I do that. So one of the key things with this, obviously, is I'm now asking it to make a value judgment in terms of what it thinks from that. Again, one of the things that I'll need to do with all of this is go through and make sure that these are exactly accurate in terms of the points that are being made by the politicians. Obviously, I've got the transcript in this instance again, so I can go and check through and make sure that everything is absolutely right with that. It's now making this judgment, so that's useful. So when it's gone through that, and it's just finishing off now, so it thinks the most important is that we've got a defence contract with Norway, so it's £10 billion investment, so that is what it's thinking would be the most important thing. And it's also talking about childcare for working families. I suppose one of the things that will come out of this from an understand, this is where you'd, again, use your journalistic judgment, because the third thing that it's put on the list here is more important, really, because that is dealing with what would be going on with Angela Rayner at this point in terms of her issue with tax on a house that she's bought as Deputy Prime Minister. So this is probably much more important to a news audience, this third and fourth point. So this quote from Kemi Badenoch, Leader of the Opposition, saying, why is Angela Rayner still in office? And then Keir Starmer talking about the fact that she'd explained her personal circumstances in detail, and him defending Angela Rayner at that point while she was in her role. Fifth point here is about Nigel Farage not being in the House of Commons, and then Kemi Badenoch attacking Keir Starmer on the economy, and Keir Starmer also talked about the European Convention on Human Rights. It's picked out quite a few quotes. It's just, again, with all these things, you're still going to need to be able to use your news judgment, because the top two are of interest, but these are things that the government would be promoting, whereas the news agenda, in terms of what's actually going on in Westminster, is much more keenly focused around the second and the third quotes there, which is about Angela Rayner at this point, and potentially things such as the economy and Nigel Farage, again, would be of interest to a wider audience, potentially. The European Convention of Human Rights, then maybe some of the things that Keir Starmer is talking about in terms of the defence contract and childcare. Those would probably be the things that would be higher on terms of the news agenda at that point. So that is a way in which this tool can really identify key quotes from there, and just in terms of making sure for the accuracy. So this quote that we've got here from Kemi Badenoch here, where she's saying submits underpaid tax. If you go into the transcript, it's here. So it's, again, accurately portraying what's in the information, which is obviously crucially important. But again, you would need to make sure, if you were going to use this as a tool, that you went back and checked that this was something that was there. But again, one of the crucial things there is that it's accurately portraying what the information is. So that's quite important. So I think in terms of this tool, that you can see that it can be potentially quite useful if you're looking at quite dense material, like the podcast with Trump was 3 hours. And if you're looking back for key quotes from Prime Minister's Question Time, it can be quite useful in terms of identifying key things that have happened within those instances. And possibly if you set up a more sophisticated prompt, it could even be much better at the news judgment. However, you are going to be, as a journalist, really integral to the use of this. You can't just let the AI decide what is important and what isn't important. You need to be able to go through and identify from the stuff that it's pulling out you need to be the one that then makes a decision about exactly how crucial this is. You're the one that understands the news agenda much better than the AI does at this point. So it's really crucial to kind of check the accuracy of the quote, but then also make your own judgments about what is the most important things that has been said, that it's picked up on. Because when you look through the Trump stuff, for example, some of those things that he's talking about are not as crucial as the fact that he's blaming China basically for COVID-19. That would be something that is a news story. Similarly, the fact that you going into Prime Minister's Question Time knowing that the government is under pressure because the Deputy Prime Minister's been accused of something, that is important context for you to understand what is going on within that Prime Minister's Question Time session. So it's important that as the journalist you make sure that you're still central to the process, but as long as you do that, then these tools can be really helpful in terms of making sure that you are potentially being able to comb through this material a little bit quicker, and ensuring that you're able to kind of pinpoint some key quotes and build out content from there.